I feel like we spend so much time obsessing over, well, exactly what we put on our plates. Like, we track our macros, we argue about diets, and we fundamentally just treat eating like pulling up to a gas station.
Right, yeah. Like you just pump the fuel in, the gauge goes up, and you drive away.
Exactly. It feels like this very direct, immediate transaction. But if you actually zoom in past the plate, the reality of what's happening inside you is, well, it's nothing like filling a gas tank.
Oh, absolutely not. The gas station analogy just completely falls apart the second you look under the biological hood.
So let's unpack this today, because the truth is far more chaotic and honestly way more fascinating. Welcome to the deep dive, everyone.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, so today's mission is bridging that gap. We're exploring a really comprehensive guide from the My-Nutri-Diary app.
Right, the app for nutrition and healthy aging.
Yeah, that one. And their breakdown of this whole process really shifts how you look at a meal. We want to decode how the food on your plate actually becomes the fuel in your cells, and how that hidden process dictates your long-term health.
And to really grasp that, we have to start by clearing up a huge systemic misconception. People constantly blur the lines between two completely distinct bodily functions, digestion and metabolism.
I hear that all the time. Like, someone will say, oh, I have such a slow metabolism, but what they actually mean is they just digest their food slowly.
Exactly. And reading through the My-Nutri-Diary text, it's so clear that blurring those two concepts just completely misses how your body operates.
Yeah.
There's a strict physical divide there.
Right. So exactly what is that divide? Let's give people an analogy.
Well, think of a massive, intricately built Lego castle.
Okay, a Lego castle. I like that.
Right. You can't just shove a whole Lego castle into your car's engine to make it run. First, you have to hire a demolition crew to painstakingly dismantle that entire castle, piece by piece, down to the individual plastic bricks.
So that's digestion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Digestion is just the demolition crew. It happens entirely within the GI tract, which is basically just a long, continuous exterior tube running through the center of your body.
Wait, exterior, but it's inside you.
Well, biologically speaking, the inside of your gut is still considered the outside world until the nutrients actually cross the intestinal barrier.
Oh, wow. I never thought about it like that. So digestion is just breaking down carbohydrates, proteins, and fats into those microscopic Lego bricks.
Yes. Its only job is preparation. It doesn't actually use the bricks, meaning the act of digestion itself doesn't give you any energy.
Right, which means digestion actually costs you energy, doesn't it?
Oh, big time. It's a highly demanding mechanical and chemical process. The actual payoff happens later, and that brings us to the construction crew.
The metabolism part.
Right. Metabolism does not happen in your stomach or your gut. It happens inside the walls of your actual cells. Every single cell in your body takes those extracted nutrients and either uses them to repair tissue or mince them into ATP.
Ah, ATP, adenosine triphosphate. You hear it constantly referred to as the energy currency of the body. But mechanically, how does a broken down Lego brick from my sandwich turn into me, like, moving my arm?
It all comes down to molecular tension. So ATP is a molecule with 3 phosphate groups attached to it.
Okay.
And those 3 phosphates are all negatively charged, which means they violently repel each other. They do not want to be attached.
Like trying to push the wrong ends of 2 magnets together.
Exactly. Sticking them together is like compressing a really heavy spring. So when your cell needs to do work like contracting a muscle fiber to move your arm, it snaps off that 3rd phosphate group.
And the spring releases.
Right.
Yeah.
And that sudden burst of chemical energy is what physically powers the cellular action. So metabolism is really just the cellular process of cashing in your food to constantly compress those microscopic springs.
That completely reframes the concept of eating for me. Like, when I eat an apple, I'm not directly fueling my legs to go for a run.
No.
I'm just feeding the demolition crew in my gut, hoping they extract enough glucose to send to my muscle cells so those cells can make the ATP that actually lets my legs move.
You've got it. Digestion is basically the world's most advanced sorting and supply facility.
So I want to trace the actual mechanics of that supply facility. Following the My-Nutri-Diary breakdown, let's track a literal bite of food. I always assumed digestion really started in the stomach.
A lot of people think that, yeah.
But the sheer coordination that kicks off the second food hits your mouth is just wild.
It is. The demolition begins instantly, and it's mechanical and chemical at the same time. Chewing isn't just about grinding food to fit down your throat.
Right, there's a signaling aspect to it.
Yeah, the physical act of chewing triggers neural signals that tell the rest of your GI tract to wake up and start producing gastric juices. And simultaneously, Your salivary glands release saliva packed with amylase enzymes.
Let's talk about enzymes for a second, because they get referenced a lot as chemical scissors. But how do they actually snip complex carbs apart?
Well, enzymes are these highly specialized proteins folded into very specific 3D shapes. They work on a lock-and-key mechanism.
Okay, so like a specific fit.
Right. An amylase enzyme floating in your saliva has a little pocket that perfectly fits a complex starch molecule. When that starch bumps into the enzyme physically binds to it and bends it.
It bends the molecule.
Yeah. That bending creates structural tension, which lowers the activation energy required to break the chemical bond. The bond snaps, and the complex carbohydrate is cleaved into smaller, simple sugars like maltose.
So if you just chew a piece of bread long enough, that bending and snapping is happening right on your tongue.
Exactly. The starches are literally shattering into simple sugars before you even swallow.
That's incredible. But the breakdown of carbs begins in the mouth, whereas proteins and fats need a much harsher environment.
Absolutely. So you swallow, the food travels down the esophagus, and it hits the stomach.
The stomach is fascinating to me because it doesn't really seem to be the main digester. It acts more like a highly elastic, chaotic holding tank.
That's a great way to describe it.
Like it can stretch to hold up to 2 liters of material.
Yeah, and that elasticity serves a dual purpose. Beyond just storage, the physical stretching of the stomach walls actually stimulates the vagus nerve.
And that fires a signal to your brain, right? Communicating satiety.
Exactly. It's the mechanical trigger that makes you feel full. But inside that stretched tank, things are highly volatile.
Because of the acid.
Right. The stomach churns the food together with intense hydrochloric acid and pepsin enzymes, basically mashing everything into a highly acidic, semi-liquid slurry.
Which is known as chyme.
Yes, chyme.
So the stomach just hands off this acidic, chaotic mush. Which brings us to the small intestine. And honestly, this feels like the biggest biological hurdle in the whole process.
It really is where the heavy lifting happens.
Because how does the small intestine possibly sort out a fat from a sugar or a protein when they're all just mixed into a slurry of stomach acid, especially when they require completely different environments to break down?
It's just a really intricate sequence of problem solving. The very first problem the small intestine has to solve is the acid.
Because it would burn the intestine.
Yeah, if that chyme dumped straight into the rest of your system, the sheer acidity would severely damage your intestinal lining. So as the chyme enters, the pancreas secretes massive amounts of bicarbonate.
Which is essentially baking soda, right?
Exactly. It instantly neutralizes the stomach acid.
It's like deploying a chemical fire extinguisher before doing anything else.
That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And only once the pH is neutralized can the real enzymatic work begin. Which brings up the next major problem you mentioned, sorting the fats.
Right, because fats are hydrophobic, they repel water.
Yep. But your digestive tract is a very watery environment, so the fats just clump together into these large, unusable masses.
So how do you break down a clump of fat that won't dissolve in the fluid where all the enzymes are floating?
The liver intervenes. It sends in bile, which is stored in the gallbladder. Bile contains these bile salts that are amphipathic.
Amphipathic, meaning what exactly?
It means one end loves water and the other end loves fat. So these salts wedge themselves into the fat clumps, physically breaking them apart into microscopic droplets called micelles.
Oh, like dish soap breaking up grease in a pan.
Exactly like that. That process, emulsification, drastically increases the surface area of the lipids. And that allows the water-soluble enzyme, pancreatic lipase, to finally reach the fat molecules and sever them into absorbable fatty acids and glycerides.
Wow. So while the bile is dealing with the fat problem, the carbs and proteins are simultaneously getting hit by their own specialized crews.
Right. The carbohydrates that survive the mouth meet enzymes like lactase, sucrase, and maltase. They bend and snap them into their final monosaccharide forms, like glucose and fructose.
And proteins.
Meanwhile, peptidase enzymes tackle the proteins, slicing those complex amino acid chains into individual free-floating amino acids.
Okay, so our Lego castle is now completely disassembled into a microscopic soup of glucose, amino acids, and fatty acids.
Yes.
But they're still inside the tube. How do we get them out of the GI tract and into the actual body?
That's where the walls of the small intestine come in. They're lined with millions of tiny finger-like projections called villi and even smaller microvilli.
Which increases the surface area.
Right. Massively.
Yeah.
It creates an internal surface area roughly the size of a tennis court, dedicated entirely to absorption.
Inside your gut. That's insane.
I know. And these cells use active transport pumps to physically grab those microscopic nutrients and pull them across the cellular membrane directly into the bloodstream.
And from there, they get shuttled into the portal vein, heading straight to the liver, right? The guide describes the liver as the body's customs control.
Yeah, the liver processes the nutrients and packages them up to be shipped to the cells for that ATP metabolism we talked about earlier.
Okay, but here is a math problem from the My-Nutri-Diary guide that really threw me for a loop.
Let me guess the fluid dynamics.
Yes, the fluids. Once the small intestine absorbs the nutrients, the leftover chyme is mostly liquid. And the text states that roughly 9 liters of water process through this digestive system every single day.
9 liters. It's a huge volume.
Right, but on average, a person only drinks maybe 2 liters of water, plus whatever moisture is in their food. So where on earth are the other 7 liters of water coming from?
They're entirely internally generated. Those 7 liters are just the biological cost of doing business.
Wait, really?
Yeah. Think back to the saliva in the mouth, the gastric acids in the stomach, the bicarbonate, the bile, the pancreatic juices. Your body is physically pulling water out of your bloodstream and flooding your GI tract with it.
Just to manufacture those secretions.
Exactly. It has to create the fluid environment necessary for the enzymes to function.
So the body dumps 7 liters of its own fluid into this external tube every single day. If it didn't pull that water back, we would dehydrate almost instantly.
Oh, for sure.
So how does it recover that massive investment?
It relies on the physics of osmosis. As the leftover chyme moves into the later stages of the small intestine and eventually the large intestine, the cells lining the gut pump electrolytes like sodium out of the tube and back into the surrounding tissue.
Okay, so it moves the salt.
Right. And that creates a solute gradient. The water naturally wants to follow the salt to balance the concentration. So the water physically diffuses across the intestinal membrane back into your body.
It is an unbelievably efficient recycling system, which makes total sense of why staying hydrated is so vital.
Absolutely.
Because if you're starting with a deficit, your body struggles to produce those 7 liters of secretions. The enzymes don't have the watery medium they need to lock onto the food particles, and the whole digestion process just grinds to a sluggish halt.
The body demands a constant baseline of fluid just to keep the internal water park running. And once that water is reabsorbed, the human-driven portion of digestion is essentially over. You've extracted the usable nutrients and reclaimed the water.
But the journey of the leftovers is far from over.
Not even close.
Right, because this is where we cross the border into what feels like a completely alien ecosystem. The leftover undigested waste enters the large intestine, and according to the research, this is the domain of the microbiome.
Yes. This is where human biology hands the baton over to trillions of microorganisms. Bacteria, fungi, viruses.
And the scale of this ecosystem is just difficult to comprehend. The source notes that the microorganisms in your large intestine outnumber your own human cells by 10 to 1.
It's staggering.
And physically, they weigh roughly 1.5 to 2 kilograms. I mean, you are walking around carrying a small dumbbell's worth of microscopic creatures that aren't even human.
Yeah, and for decades, the large intestine was viewed simply as a biological waste management facility, like just a place to dehydrate stool before excretion.
But that's changed, right?
Entirely.
Mm-hmm.
Massive leaps in genome sequencing have forced us to recognize this 2-kilogram microbial mass as a vital functioning organ in its own right.
But if human metabolism is happening inside human cells, what are these bacteria actually doing down there? Are they just, like, eating our trash?
Not exactly. They're performing a process called fermentation. They feed on the complex carbohydrates and structural plant matter that our own digestive enzymes were incapable of breaking down.
Okay, but this isn't just about waste disposal.
No, the biological byproduct of this fermentation is critical to our survival.
The My-Nutri-Diary text specifically focuses on the consequences when this microbial ecosystem gets thrown out of balance, a state called dysbiosis.
Right, dysbiosis.
And the immediate effects are what you'd expect, right? Irritable bowel syndrome, inflammatory bowel disease. But the research points to systemic failures too, like increased risk for obesity, diabetes, neurological disorders, and even depression.
Yeah, the links are undeniable now.
So how does a bacterial imbalance in the gut cause depression or diabetes?
It comes back to the gut-brain axis and the metabolic byproducts these bacteria produce. When your microbes ferment certain fibers, they excrete molecules that actually enter your bloodstream.
Wait, they cross back into the body.
Exactly. And these molecules communicate directly with your immune system, regulating inflammation levels across your entire body. They even interact with the vagus nerve, sending signals that can alter neurotransmitter production in your brain. So if beneficial bacteria die off and inflammatory bacteria overgrow, that's the dysbiosis, your 2-kilogram microbial organ essentially starts pumping toxic signaling molecules into your systemic circulation.
I was really struck by the two main disruptors of this ecosystem mentioned in the guide, which were stress and antibiotics. I mean, I understand stress alters gut motility, literally changing how fast or slow things move, which obviously disrupts the bacterial environment.
Right, the physical environment changes.
But antibiotics are on an entirely different level of destruction, aren't they?
They are. Look, antibiotics are life-saving modern miracles when you're battling a severe acute infection. But ecologically speaking, using a broad-spectrum antibiotic is like clear-cutting an ancient, old-growth forest just to eradicate a few invasive weeds.
That's a rough visual.
It is, but it's accurate. You wipe out the pathogen, but you also destroy the incredibly complex, deep-rooted networks of beneficial bacteria that regulate your immune system.
So it leaves the forest floor barren.
Yeah, and highly vulnerable to being overrun by harmful inflammatory species.
Yeah.
The emphasis on limiting unnecessary antibiotic use is fundamentally about protecting this delicate inner forest.
Which brings up, honestly, the most actionable part of this entire deep dive. If we want to avoid clear-cutting the forest, and instead we want to cultivate and feed this 2-kilogram universe, how do we do it?
The text points directly to fiber.
Right. But it draws a very clear line between insoluble and soluble fiber.
Yes, both are critical, but they serve entirely different functions. Insoluble fiber is the rigid structural component of plants. Your body can't digest it, and for the most part, neither can your bacteria.
So it just passes through.
Largely intact, yeah. Its job is physical maintenance. It adds bulk to the stool and basically squeaks through the intestines, keeping the physical transit moving efficiently.
But the soluble fiber is the actual food.
Correct. Soluble fiber dissolves in water, forming a thick gel-like substance, and crucially, human enzymes cannot break the bonds of soluble fiber.
So it survives the whole process.
It survives the acidic churning of the stomach, and it completely bypasses the chemical factory of the small intestine. It arrives in the large intestine perfectly intact, specifically to serve as the primary fuel source for your microbiome.
And when the bacteria eat that soluble fiber, the source highlights that they produce something called short-chain fatty acids. Why are those specific acids so important?
Short-chain fatty acids, or SCFAs, are the biochemical payback for feeding your microbes. When bacteria ferment soluble fiber, they release SCFAs, and these molecules do extraordinary things.
Like what?
Well, locally, they're the primary energy source for the cells lining your colon. They keep the intestinal barrier strong and prevent a leaky gut. Systemically, they get absorbed into the bloodstream where they bind to specific receptors on immune cells.
Meaning they talk to the immune system.
Exactly. They actively suppress inflammatory responses throughout the body. They even help regulate blood sugar levels.
Okay, so I am physically incapable of digesting the soluble fiber in an apple. I eat it strictly to feed trillions of bacteria just so they can ferment it and manufacture short-chain fatty acids to lower my inflammation in return.
That's the deal you've made with them.
It really does reframe a trip to the grocery store.
Yeah.
You aren't just buying groceries for yourself anymore. You are actively feeding an internal ecosystem.
Definitely. When you look at the dietary guidance for healthy aging, a diet rich in vegetables, fruits, legumes, nuts, and whole grains, it's entirely centered on providing the diverse arrays of soluble fiber required to keep those diverse bacterial populations thriving.
You're eating to feed the microbes that keep you functioning.
Exactly.
Man, let's just pull the lens back and look at the sheer scale of the mechanics we just covered.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. We started with the mechanical chewing and the enzymatic bending of starches in the mouth. Then we dropped into the chaotic 2-liter acidic slurry of the stomach.
Then into the small intestine.
Right, where the body neutralizes the acid, deploys bile to emulsify the fats, and uses microscopic active transport pumps to pull the disassembled Lego bricks into the bloodstream.
Plus the water mechanics.
Oh yeah, we saw the body physically pump 7 liters of its own fluid into the system, only to meticulously pull it back out through osmosis. We watched the raw materials get shipped to the cells where metabolism actually happens, snapping the phosphate bonds of ATP to power our lives.
And finally, the microbiome.
Right. We track the leftovers into the large intestine, where a 2-kilogram microbial ecosystem ferments the remaining fiber just to regulate our immune system.
It is a remarkable sequence of problem solving from top to bottom. And if there's one lingering concept to take away from this analysis, it's the profound agency you have over that final microbial stage.
How so?
Well, every single meal you consume is essentially a democratic election held in your gut. By choosing what you put on your plate, whether it's a complex array of fiber-rich plants or, heavily processed foods entirely stripped of their fiber, you are actively casting a vote.
A vote on which microbes survive.
Exactly. You're voting on which bacterial species get the resources to multiply and which ones are starved out. You are not just a passive vessel for these microbes. You have the daily ability to consciously cultivate this 2-kilogram universe inside you, dictating your systemic health bite by bite.
I love that. Next time you sit down to eat, remember, you are dismantling a Lego castle to provide the raw materials for your cells, but you're also laying out a feast to fertilize the ecosystem that shares your body. Choose those building blocks wisely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the incredible machine that is you. Catch you next time.